Frank, you want to be my roadie? Wow, that's pretty good for a guy. Ta-da. Okay, we good? All right, we're good in the back, right? Everybody can hear? Cool. I wasn't really sure what to expect this morning, and I got the invitation to do this about 2 weeks ago. So I told the guys at work, my guys down here in the front, that I was going to wing this a little bit. But I have a lot of things to say, and they're probably going to go like this. But what's really cool is that I have a lot to share. So I'm hoping that at some point it clicks and there's questions and things that really you want to hear, because I've spent a lot of time in the beer business. So let's talk briefly how I got here. I'm a native San Diegan, and there aren't many of those people in the world. I'm 41 years old. I own my own business now. I'm very fortunate to do so. Growing up here in San Diego, my father owned a print shop here in downtown San Diego. It was over on India. Actually, it was on Kentner, just below the pizza place. Felipe's, yeah. So my dad owned a printing business, and I grew up in that, working in what was a very creative environment. My dad owned the business, and I worked with him a lot of days, spent a lot of time on the weekends doing things. And, you know, back in the day, you could find me on Saturdays working on the Padre programs, the San Diego State programs. I was one of the guys that would work on the stitcher and load pockets and things like that. So I left San Diego, graduated high school, went to Northern Arizona University. I worked in the print shop at Northern Arizona University, and while I was there, I sort of got a degree in English, and somehow managed to take a degree in English and translate that into a brewing job here back in San Diego. And I was actually working at a print shop in downtown San Diego after I graduated, when I got hired to be a brewer. And so, thankfully in 1996, I left the printing business behind. No disrespect to my dad, I just didn't want to run that company, and I found sort of a niche in what I do in the beer business. Today, I operate with about 50 of my closest friends a brewery up in San Marcos called Port Brewing and the Lost Abbey. Yep, that's a good thing. So I've been in the beer business here in San Diego since 1996, and so I have a lot of stories that I can share. Wanted to sort of talk later about how it is that we really deal with having 3 brands in-house. We actually launched a new brand this year called the Hop Concept, and went through a whole design phase to do so. But a lot of the Port Brewing and Lost Abbey branding and marketing stuff that was sort of set in motion in 2006 when we opened our brewery, I put sort of on my back and created a lot of that beyond the recipes as well. So I've had my hand in a lot of those things. So a couple of sort of positive notes or things that kind of have been sort of in my world, or I guess it's 2 proverbs. The first one's a Burmese proverb, and it basically states, if there's no wind, then row. And if you think about what it means to be in the San Diego brewing business, basically 20 plus years ago, there was no beer in this town. And so I think a lot of my friends and I that started out in that, you know, in that mid-90s sort of sense of brewing here in this town, really did have to do that. There was no wind in our sails necessarily, and that's completely contrasted with today. I think it's a very interesting sort of message to those of you that are looking to be in a spot like that. The other one is that sometimes the only available form of transportation is a leap of faith, and I think that's pretty cool. If you think about it, so many people today are out there starting breweries, launching second careers, or taking chances in ways that probably 15 years ago, even 5-10 years ago, they may not have thought was possible. But because of what the craft brewing community has built here on this sense of a revolution, if you will, they have that opportunity. And so it really sums up sort of how my feelings about what we've done in this town is. And I'm going to go with this reference, and it's probably not going to make sense to some of you, but in the early 1990s, there was a show on MTV called The Real World. And The Real World, it's a good laugh. You know, they basically picked a bunch of strangers, put them all together, and filmed them. And the notion of that was their story. I feel it's a little bit like my friends and I that have been in this beer business for so long. You know, I could rattle off about 20 names, and you probably would know 18, 15 of them. But we all have been brewing or working in this beer business since the mid-1990s here in San Diego. And it's pretty impressive when you think about it. A bunch of people sort of hunkered down, took a city that had almost no beer culture to speak of, and now we're part of this community of beer, this industry, if you will, that contributes more to this city than Comic-Con does annually, and that's pretty damn impressive. So 26 years ago, there were no breweries in this town, and now we have 109 operating brew houses, one of which we're going to next door, right? Yeah. So I was brought out here to talk about a revolution, and you know, revolution's interesting because as a kid growing up, you know, the only revolution that I knew of was the Revolutionary War. And it's probably the most sort of, if you type in revolution into the search engine, it's probably the first one that pops up. Wanted to ask the question, do you suppose the people fighting in that war, you know, knew that that was a revolutionary war, or were they just fighting for something? And so that's a significant sort of question that goes on, because I don't think that any of us that are part of the beer business really entered the beer business in the mid-90s fully committed to a full revolution, if you will. I think we just got into this because it's what we wanted to do. You know, it was our passionate pursuit, and it happened to have changed a lot of things. If you look at revolution as a secondary meaning, you know, we see what is RPM. And so as a kid, you know, car engines, my bike crank, bicycle crank, and then, you know, back when I was growing up, record players were a thing. And so RPM was associated with how fast those things turned. You know, and then I guess if you want to talk about it as a kid, you know, the Beatles were sort of still a thing, and so, you know, they had that one little ditty talking about a revolution. So I attended Catholic grade school, and no one at a Catholic grade school dare starts a revolution. So I wasn't really ever part of a revolution until I got into this business, and so here I am supposed to be talking to you about this craft brewing revolution in San Diego. You know, there's been a tremendous amount of change since I got into this business. So much of it was a struggle for the brands that are huge today, and we can certainly talk about their stories and mine. But what's been most interesting, I think, is that this sense of a beer revolution is really a de-evolution, if you will, or a devolution of what the food system was. So much of my youth was basically, you know, cheap and simple food. You know, we had white bread, Folgers coffee, and craft singles. And today we have these rustic loaves and independent roasters and this cheese called Humboldt Fog. And I'm still fond of craft singles, just so you know. Never was a white bread kid though, so that's okay. But you know, hand forged or handcrafted, artisanal, and forged are basically all the associations that we work with today, and that goes out past craft beer. I mean, so much of branding is built around that sense, and the sense of honesty and space and place. And so much of my youth was on commodity-based things that, you know, who knew where the white bread came from? Who cared? You know, it really didn't matter. But we've got some very interesting things going on in the craft business today. I think it was about a month ago, someone filed suit here in San Diego, suing Miller Coors over their Blue Moon brand because they were using the words artfully crafted. And it's pretty interesting to see a mega national brewer using the words artfully crafted and have somebody come back and say that that's not authentic. I mean, I think it's truly fascinating in that regard. But we went from about 40 years ago, no beer really being on the shelves that was from a place and a space, because it was all commodity based, or you had to travel someplace to get those beers. You had to go to Europe, you had to go to Ireland and Belgium and Germany. And we have a term for that, and that's where they basically say you had to go to that place and consume that beer in situ. You had to have it in that spot. And that's gone away. We can ship beer now, you can order it over the mail, all those things. And it's very interesting because now we're coming back to another sense of space and place, and that is this movement of local. And local has become very big. Even in the last 5 years for us as producers, we're sending beer to Chicago and Boston and Philadelphia, and that market has collapsed a little bit under the weight of local. We used to sell more beer in those places, but now there are new producers that have popped up who can do some of the same things that we do, and it's been very interesting to watch that happen. There's about 3,500 operating breweries in our country right now, and prior to Prohibition, there was about 10,000. So the question always comes up, how many is too many, and where are we going with this? Is the revolution, nearing its end, or are we just sort of in the middle of it? And I sort of see it kind of being like this. It's going to go through some phases, and we've gone through a ginormous spike, and I think it's just going to keep going up, but not at necessarily the same rate. We're very lucky here in San Diego because there's basically a brewery on every corner, and if there isn't one, it's popping up tomorrow. We talk in the beer business of what is called a share, and a share is how much of beer or how much of the pot we are. And we are sort of blessed these days to be a 30 share. That means that 1 out of every 3 beers basically, or 30 out of every 100 beers sold in this town is a craft beer. And that's pretty impressive. If you think about how much that is in terms of beer in general, it's a lot. Portland, Oregon is considered to be sort of the high point for share, and they're nearly a 50 share, which means that 1 out of every 2 beers sold in Portland is craft beer. And I think that we can be well on our way in this town to going there as well. It's crazy to me because when I got into the business in 1996, this was the #1 Coors Light town in the entire country. I imagine some of those were the people coming out from Arizona to vacation here. But still, it was the biggest Coors Light territory, and we're talking less than 20 years ago. So let's talk about a couple of key dates and some things that have happened along the way and what sort of built this. 1989 was the very first opening of a brewery in San Diego proper since Prohibition. That was Karl Strauss down here in downtown San Diego. And then a few breweries opened up here and there. I had notes, I may have left them. Very few breweries, about 1 a year, kind of opened up. San Diego Brewing, Callahan's, Pizza Port, Solana Beach, and a couple of other places. But 1996 was really, in my mind, sort of the high water year for when things changed. So mostly because that's when I got into the business. And a few other people that you might know, the guys at Stone, Ballast Point, AleSmith in 1995, and even Coronado Brewing, all opened their doors in 1996. So a huge amount of change happened at that point, but it wasn't easy. I mean, I remember in 1996 working here in downtown San Diego at a brewery called Cervecerias La Cruda. It was at 4th and Island or 4th and Market, and that brewery, it was my first brewing position, only lasted 9 months. And at that same time, Stone opened their doors, struggled with selling beer because they were only offering 4 beers. Most places in town didn't know what craft beer was, didn't really have a lot of craft beer on tap. If craft beer was on tap in 1996, it was probably from the Northwest. It was either Sierra Nevada, Anchor Steam. It might have been something out of Oregon, whether it was Deschutes, Widmer, things like that. And so it took a lot of effort for beer in this town to be picked up as a local thing and as a craft production. The guys from Stone are pretty famous for telling the story that they nearly went out of business, and a lot of craft breweries share that same story. It was a struggle because it wasn't a standard thing. Most of you probably grew up with craft beer in your refrigerators and saw it at a young age because that's how this thing has gone. But there were a lot of people 15, 20 years ago who didn't have that experience. People who needed to be told what it was, needed to be educated. And thankfully, I think that one of the coolest things for us is sort of the advent of how quickly the internet picked up and became a really good source of information. Prior, basically when I got into brewing in 1996, there was not a lot of information about beer on the internet, and it took a few years for people to start having sort of websites and places for that to go. And now today we have something called ratebeer.com, and we have beeradvocate.com, and we have Untapped, and all of those places at a moment's notice on your phone can tell you exactly which beer you want to drink. If you walk into a bar and there's 5 new beers or 5 beers you've never heard of, you can step back, pull up who made that beer, look at the notes, and decide whether or not you want to drink it, all without ever having to talk or ask the bartender to break stride, which I think is pretty interesting. Because at the minimum, we're able to really research beer in a way that wasn't available back when we started this. And I think without a doubt, it's been a big part of why beer has become so successful in this town and lots of places, because you can access that information. Imagine being, 15, 20 years ago, being a wine drinker, and you had to know a lot about wine to be able to really talk about wine. Well, nowadays people know a lot about beer because it's such a part of our culture and it's so right in front of us, and I think that's pretty cool. So 1996 was hugely important in this town, and then since 1996, we went probably we went about 11 to 14 years where about 5 to 6 breweries kind of opened up every year. And there were a few years where no breweries actually opened up at all. And that's kind of shocking today to think about that. I did the research. In the last 5 years, we've added 80-something breweries in this town. And the high point, I believe, was 2014 when 25 new brew houses opened. So it's been an incredible journey. I loved being in the early part of the business because it brought me to here. The challenge of being in the business today is that so many people have opened their doors who I don't know by name or share the stories with. A lot of my friends that I spent the better part of the 90s and early 2000s traveling with, drinking with, being around, we all basically were of like mind. And now we have 109 people running brew houses, and again, people I've never met, and it's difficult to get out and meet them because we're running a business full time. So the challenge is to say, how do we keep that community of brewers going that built this town? It's a pretty tight town. In terms of our story, we opened our doors in 2006. We took over the original Stone Brewery building in San Marcos. I would have preferred to have been closer to the beach because I used to work at the Pizza Port in Solana Beach and really enjoyed being able to walk out the door and surf every day. But we inherited a great brewing facility and one that we're really proud of because the guys at Stone spent 10 years making beer in that facility, handed us the keys to the building, and for about 20 years now, it's been some of the best beer you could buy in town. So we're proud of that legacy. We represent 3 brands today. As I said, we're Port Brewing Company. Some of those brands were developed at Pizza Port, the restaurants, and now we've taken them off to a sort of a wider distribution. Those brands are what we call sort of West Coast centric. If you've seen the labels and the art and things like that, very cartoony, very clip art. We inherited a lot of that sort of premise in terms of the branding. The Lost Abbey was the second brand that we launched, and we were very early on in doing so. Not many breweries had 2 brands under one roof, but having 2 brands allowed us to tell 2 very distinctly different stories. And those 2 different stories actually allow for great positioning. And there's plenty of people out in the world that don't realize that those 2 brands are produced under one roof in the same facility, which is, I think, a real feather in our cap. We wanted to keep them separate, but at the same time, know that the same guys are producing them and making great world-class beer. We had this crazy idea late last year to launch a 3rd brand because of the explosion of new breweries and beers in the town and places where we sell beer. IPA has become the #1 sort of style of beer. It's the hottest thing under the sun right now, and I don't think it's going to stop. I think people have acquired a taste for hops. But one of the challenges that we were seeing, especially with lots of people stepping on toes and branding and IP sort of trademark issues and stuff, was how do you know what the beer tastes like if you've never had it before? How can I be convinced to buy it if I've never heard of the brewery itself, the brand, or have no relationship to the people? And so many of the brands that are out there now, it's really difficult to have a relationship to the people or even know anything about them because there's so many new entrants. So we created this thing called the Hop Concept, and basic premise was taste and smell. And so what we wanted to do was tell you how the beer would taste and how the beer would smell and simplify it. So there's only 4 beers that are produced in the series right now. And basically the premise is how does it taste and smell is the name of the beer. So when you look up on the board, you get taste and smell. The first one we came out with was Dank and Sticky. The second one was, well, we had to, right? So Dank and Sticky was the first one. Citrus and Piney was the second one. The third one, which is in the fermenters as we speak, is Lemon and Grassy. And in late September, we will be releasing the 4th one, which is Tropical and Juicy. We wanted to give the consumer, the people that are new to the space, an idea and an understanding of what hops can do and how they behave. So in a lot of ways, it's been a really cool working process for us this year. We worked with Experiences for Mankind on the design work and are very, very pleased with how that went. So let's talk about Revolution. I'd prefer some questions from the crowd to make this better. I didn't really want to sit up here and give you too much of a history of the San Diego brewing scene outright, but because I've been in the scene for 20 years, I can tell you a lot of cool stories, but let's steer the boat and the direction in the ways that are meaningful to you guys versus me just going blah, 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 blah. Right here in the front. Regarding your history, can you talk about a little bit how you spun off from Port Brewing? So 2 things are important. First of all, they're going to pour some liquid refreshment because we're all getting thirsty. No Swamis today. We brought some devotion. The question was, getting into the business in 1996, did I have any relationship with Greg at Stone? And then how did I transition from Pizza Port to Port Brewing? Let me tackle the second one first. That is, how did I go from Pizza Port to Port Brewing? I spent 9 years as the head brewer at the Pizza Port in Solana Beach. So when the brew pub here in downtown closed, I went to Solana Beach and took over as the head brewer. My partners and I then had the opportunity in 2005 to start a second company. They own the Pizza Port outright, brother and sister, Vince and Gina Marsalia, and they offered me a chance to form a new company with them, Port Brewing and the Lost Abbey. And so I went from being just a brewer at one single location to being in charge of the space in San Marcos. In the very back, I saw another hand.
Yeah, I was just curious. I know that this craft beer movement has helped to create an identity in San Diego that's right. From what I understand, for a long time it didn't exist. And I'm curious, do you, like the brewers and like the OG brewer guys, do you guys get support from the city at all?
You're talking as an industry, do we get support from the city? Yeah. Absolutely. The city has been very. I won't say that they were tremendously late to the party, but in the last few years, they've been better of late. One of the coolest things that happened is that as this proverbial rising tide floated so many boats, they couldn't ignore us anymore. And what happened is that the convention and tourism side of things saw what we were doing with San Diego Beer Week every November, and committed some significant tourism dollars to building up San Diego Beer Week as a brand of its own. But what was pretty exceptional back in the day is that as we built this San Diego brewing brand, it became one of the top 5 industries in San Diego. And for the longest time, a couple of the biggest industries were defense, and defense has sort of waned over the years. It's not as big as when I was a kid. Certainly tourism's always been a big part of it, and then biotech and things like that. But we're now, as a brewing community, one of the top 5 dollar drivers in San Diego. And so as a group, we become very important in that regard. I would like to say that the city of San Diego did an amazing job in the last few years of recognizing the economic drivers that were available to them. The state of California had some redevelopment money that was allocated to certain districts and places and things. And so if you ended up building a brewery in certain redevelopment zones, lots of credits and things were available. And it's pretty simple to see that Miramar and that area up there where Ballast Point and AleSmith and Green Flash and lots of breweries have landed was a big part of that. The redevelopment district sort of extended from San Diego all the way up to Rancho Bernardo. But anytime you opened up a facility, there were credits and things available. And so that money dried up about 2 years ago, I think. And when the state money dried up, the city of San Diego actually stepped in and helped facilitate both Ballast Point and AleSmith's new facilities in Miramar by giving some credits and some sewer tax. There's a whole bunch of stuff behind the scenes, but they got some really cool capabilities from the city to go ahead and launch those new facilities. So yes, it's been good. Okay, I'm going to go all the way to the back and work my way forward.
How do you feel about Beer Fest every week?
Yeah, Beer Fests. It's funny because there was some notes that I was actually part of. In 1997, we threw the very first San Diego Strong Ale Festival at Pizza Port in Carlsbad. And since then, beer festivals have become just an enormous thing. When we were downtown at La Cruda, street scene was still a very big, vibrant downtown thing. And they used to have the best beer garden because you could go on Friday night and Saturday night, and it was 21 and up. And you could take and go buy a beer at the beer garden and then walk to the concert. Those are the kinds of things that I think we need to get back to. I think those are amazing places for beer to be participants. Adam, who's our media and marketing director, and you'll know him because he has the best hair. Well, I don't know, Frank's is pretty good too. But there's beer festivals every weekend, and I imagine we turn down 4 for every one that we do. In fact, we're looking at how many less beer festivals we can do because they've just become sort of passé, and I don't think that they do what they should do for us as sort of motivating consumers. Now, there's plenty of new breweries in town that can get in front of consumers that have never heard of them, but we're an established brand, and I think at some point we've been discussing that some of them may be doing more harm than good for our needs. So there was one way over the back. Yep. It's a great question. So the question is basically what's the next big hurdle for local breweries, right? And then how does that work on a national basis or otherwise? Okay, so what's happening on a national basis is that a lot of breweries are getting they're just getting their wings out. There's a lot of beer going out. And the biggest thing is that the big guys are starting to buy up some regional breweries, and what's going to happen is when they get enough of the regional beers, thank you, I am thirsty. When they get enough of the regional breweries to execute a strategy, they probably will start dropping price. So price is going to become very interesting. For a long time, we've had a lot of good price increasing, and just sort of, we've been able to work within a scope where price wasn't a hindrance. But at the point where people have to start being incredibly competitive on price, it's going to erode the margins, and the guys in the middle that don't have efficiencies of capability are going to lose out. Now, locally, let's take it from a local level, because the city's been pretty good, but let's take it to the state level. This is a very difficult place to do business with respect to running a business in California. Nationally, we just saw managed healthcare come on board, but there's talk of $15 and $13 minimum wage stuff coming. We've got a new Stormwater Act that's going into place July 1st, and that new Stormwater Act places a lot more restrictions on work outside of the building and things like that. Of course, we're in the middle of this drought. We have friends that run a brewery up in Northern California called Bear Republic, and they're in a little town called Cloverdale, and they haven't had any increase in water in the last 2 years, even though they spent a bunch of money and essentially loaned a bunch of money to the city to install new wells. They haven't seen any new water in the last 2 years, but their brand was growing at 30% a year, and so they've had some really big difficulties in that regard. All right, so I'll go out this way. Good. So the question was about the binational breweries and the big breweries in Mexico, right? Right. To go across the border. Yeah. I think the beer scene in Mexico, specifically the one in Tijuana, is very interesting because it's the proximity to what's going on here is so easy to get to. I mean, you're a half hour from here, right, to the border. So I could see Tijuana becoming an incredibly vibrant beer city. Because the culture there's certainly enough money down there in Tijuana where that part of it in terms of the cost associated with buying those kinds of beers would work. And I think that the amount of people and the energy from Tijuana and from the brewery side or the beer side, we see all these guys coming up here asking questions. And I 5-10 years from now, I could see it being an incredibly vibrant, 30 plus sort of, brewery region. Go back this way, was there? I have only seen Kings of the Craft, and I'm not involved with it, but I've seen it on, it's PBS, right? And I have two of them DVR'd on my TV, and I have not had a chance to watch them yet. So, all right. How do we keep what? Question was how do we keep our two different companies separate? They're actually one company under the LLC umbrella. They're just two separate brands. So we have two brand Bibles, we have direction, we have thoughts as to which one, what beers fit here and what beers fit here. It's all strategy. It's not just, the beer is made in one facility. So at any point we could have a Lost Abbey beer getting brewed, a Lost Abbey beer getting kegged, and a Port Brewing beer getting bottled all at the same time. In the front here.
First off, with breweries like Green Flash and Stone opening and still being on the East Coast, first, do you ever dream that was going to be your use right now? Is it ever think about that? And then second, how important do you think it is that they, when they're entering those markets, that they continue to tell the story and keep that story rooted in San Diego?
Sure. So the question is with Stone and Green Flash having announced that they're going to put facilities on the East Coast, sort of what's the thought, and did I ever think that was going to happen? So I can answer that one. And then the second question was about the story, which is that they're a San Diego-based company now operating from here, right? Space and place. I can't imagine any of us back in 1996 thought that there would be a Stone Brewing Company on the East Coast, let alone one going in Berlin. So they're building two breweries at this point. They also operate two here in town, right? Liberty Station has a facility and Escondido. It's pretty incredible to think that that's where we've come to. And if you want to talk about what's revolutionary, that's incredible to think that we went from being this little thing to this giant brewery. But that's where the business has gone, the entirety of this movement. And I actually think it's more of a movement than sort of a getting back to a revolution or a cyclical thing. But it's impressive to think about it. Now, that being said, how are they going to position that brewery back east? How are they going to tell the story of a West Coast coming east? Is it going to become, will it become in Richmond, Virginia for them a local brand? Is that something that is going to happen? Will those people, clearly they picked those spots because there wasn't a lot of local pressure, and they will have an opportunity to tell that story and build that. And they will have to, I think, frankly, to be successful. Here and then there. So,
is there a style that you need to catch up to the IPA popularity?
Question was, is there a style that I think will catch up to the popularity of IPA? No, and I think I don't think that there will be something that will catch it, because what's happened with IPA is that it's morphed. It's not just a singular thing anymore. It's a whole category. IPA is now white, it's red, it's black, it's brown, it's double, it's triple, it's low. There's low. It's its own thing. If you treat it like red wine, it becomes its own sub thing, right? So now IPA can be all these little different things underneath the original subcategory. So India Pale Ale, which is what IPA is, originally was brewed in England, and then they hopped it at a higher rate. They added a little bit more alcohol to it and put it on a boat and sent it to the Indies. That's how it became known as India Pale Ale. At least that's the story that we've all been told. Whether or not that's absolutely true or not, okay. But the reality is today, IPA is typically from 5 to 7% alcohol. It's highly hopped. It's incredibly, aromatic because of the dry hopping process. Hops added post-fermentation. And the basis is that you're really talking about this one ingredient, hops, and how best they can be utilized in a manner that makes it incredibly aromatic, incredibly flavorful, and that's what IPA is. But IPA can now be brown, it can be black, it can be red, it's white, and it can be all those things. And so because of that, I don't think anything's going to catch up to it, because I think there's so many permutations possible within that set of palette, that color spectrum, before you go up and down in alcohol. I mean, now all of a sudden you could have a low alcohol brown IPA, right, or a low alcohol white one. And it's going to be foolish when that happens, because we call those brown ales, but it's going to happen, I promise you. And the amount of innovation that's going on is pretty impressive. That being said, there's a lot of bad beer being made because people are taking chances in some very, I would almost say, bombastic, ridiculous ways, and in doing so have kind of proverbially bastardized some of this stuff. So we take a premise at our brewery that we love classic beer, but we love classic beer in the sense of really working to make some of the things we do become classics. And if we take that stance, we're going to be just fine. I'm getting the push, so we're not going anywhere.
It's not a push. You're getting a new fresh one to toast with.
Oh.
So I guess you did get the push on the last question.
Tell them
what we're drinking. Let's do a toast.
Okay, so you've been drinking Devotion. Devotion is one of our 6 year-round Lost Abbey beers. It's the hoppiest one that we make. It's the green label, in case you're going to go buy some later, or not, but in case you happen to walk by and leave it on the shelf later, it's the green one. Devotion is one of our best-selling beers. It's on tap at a lot of places, 6.5%, very simple, and going to toast the morning.
Yeah, let's toast, you guys. Thanks, Tommy, for being here.
Cheers. Appreciate you guys getting out of bed.